He was, he was speaking with a journalist just days after Democrats did better than expected in the midterm elections. He was trying to suggest where Republicans should focus their attention in the upcoming 2024 races. Recalling that moment, Randi asks near the start of her book, why would America's former top spy and top diplomat call a 5-foot-tall Jewish lesbian grandmother union leader who's married to a rabbi the most dangerous person in the world? It reflected a strategy by many on the political right, Randi says, to blame teachers repeatedly for kids failing in school, for promoting curriculums that address race and sexuality, and generally for taking our country down. Now, Randi's book is intended to push back against such vilification of teachers. It argues that attacks on schools and teachers have long been a hallmark of fascist regimes. As dictators have risen to power, Randi writes, they have often banned books and sought to control school curriculums. They have feared teachers, she asserts, because teachers teach people to think for themselves and see past propaganda and scare tactics. The purpose of her book, Randi says, is both to celebrate public school teachers and explain why public schools are essential for our democracy. Although it's an especially timely book, given the Trump administration's move to effectively dismantle the Department of Education, Randi actually started thinking about writing it several years ago, when political attacks on teachers intensified in the wake of school closings during the COVID pandemic. The attacks then, she says, struck her as more prevalent and sinister than ever, and a cause to sound alarm, which she does cogently and passionately in her book. In conversation with Randi this evening will be Valerie Strauss, who for many years covered education for the Washington Post at both the local and the national level, and authored a popular blog on education called The Answer Sheet. I'd also like to note that this event is in partnership with Free DC, which is a movement sponsored by Community Change, and Community Change Action, aimed at retaining home rule and promoting statehood for the district. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Randi Weingarten and Valerie Strauss.
Wow. Yeah, wow. Thank you all for coming. What a crowd. Great. Let's just get started fast. We will, I know they originally said that you had to write your questions, and I do have one good question that came through, which I'll speak later, but we have a microphone, which we'll get to later. I would like to start with the Pompeo bit. Now, I did write about education for a very long time, and I wrote a lot of stories about really questionable behavior. But this one, I have to say, when I heard that day, November 21st, 2022, I want to know what you thought. Did that help animate your research and writing of this book and wanting to do it? And what does it say about where we are today? That, again, a teacher and a union leader, and a highly effective union leader, would be the most dangerous person in the world.
So, first off, can I just say, wouldn't it be great if the answer sheet was out there every single day right now, and if you were still reporting? Let me just say that. Yes, you can all clap. And I also just want to say to Brad, thank you so much. Thank you not only for this bookstore and the intellectual heft that it carries in Washington, but thank you for everything that you've done. So this is where I was when I heard. I am a lawyer and a teacher by training, and I'm a New York State lawyer. So this means that every 2 years around the time of my birthday, I have to take 24 CLE credits, continuing legal education credits. So I was on a very long plane ride because there had been a meeting, an international meeting of trade unions in Australia. So I am on a very, very long plane ride home that night, that day, listening to continuing legal education because I'm listening to as many credits as I can take so that I can keep on re-upping my certification. So I am on Wi-Fi in the plane, and all of a sudden, my notifications start blowing up. Like what? Like this is 2 days before Thanksgiving. Like what is going on here? And so I started looking, and I frankly didn't believe it at first. I thought it was disinformation. I thought it was, something, because my first reaction was, okay, Pompeo is running for president, but really? Like he's the former CIA director. He's the former Secretary of State. Like the most dangerous person. I'm like, what happened to like Putin? Gee. So, I'm starting to go, so then my second reaction was, wow, this is now what it takes to start trying to separate yourself out from the other Republicans? Is this what the entire next 2 years is going to be about? That was my second reaction. And my third reaction was actually when I read the whole thing, was really red hot anger, not for what he said about me, but the second line was really reckless and disgusting, because the second line was saying about teachers something to the extent that they teach filth. So how dare you say about not only my members, but the millions of teachers in America who a parent is going to say the former Secretary of State is now saying, I'm teaching filth? How dare you? So that's what really got me angry. And then, we kept on thinking about how to use this to actually make him small. But it did actually push me to write. I mean, it's not like I don't have a day job that's a little, absorbing. But it pushed me to say, what can I do that actually exposes this complete exploitation of the moment, to the extent and an exploitation that really hurts in the alchemy of teaching and learning by trying to demonize so much. I saw it, not what he said about me, Valerie, but what he said about teachers. I saw it as he knows better. He knows what fascism is. He knows what authoritarianism is. He knows better. He knows by saying that teachers teach filth or smut or whatever the words were, that I needed to figure out a way to expose it.
So let's talk about the title of your book, because you knew it would be provocative, right? And it was even before, did you have the title before Trump was elected and Project 2025 started to be enacted?
Yes.
And if so, why did you decide that? And you write in the book that you're not going to call anybody a fascist. But I'm wondering if somebody walks like a fascist and quacks like a fascist and espouses fascist principles, why not?
So, two reasons. So, I mean, truth be told, to everybody who's watching on C-SPAN. The book manuscript was due, initially due about a week after the election. And I asked for a couple more weeks. And the publisher and Penguin Random House published the book, and I'm very grateful to them, thesis. But I asked for a few more weeks because I really wanted to think about it again. And I wanted to think about not only whether I was doing it, but how I was doing it. I thought about the title weeks and months beforehand. And I thought, and then I actually set upon the title again after what General Kelly and General Milley did, and because that actually scared me. I'll explain it if you want me to.
Tell them quickly what they said.
Actually scared me almost more than anything else, because they warned. It's not like either General Milley or General Kelly you would call liberal diehards, but they understand and understood comparative governments, for lack of a better word. They understood the warning they were giving. It's not like they, and the warning they gave, thank you, the warning they gave was essentially right before the election, 2 or 3 weeks before. They were both interviewed. I think one did a book, right? And they said words to the effect of, watch out, Trump really has fascistic tendencies. One said, both of them used the word fascist, both of them used, and their experiences. And what I was concerned about was the reaction, which was a political reaction as opposed to taking to heed the warning. And that really scared me. And but putting my teacher hat on, look, I am a lawyer and a social studies teacher. And putting my teacher hat on, I said, of course this is true. Because think about any of you in high school, and look, I feel like I'm to blame about this too. And part of this is what happened with No Child Left Behind and the construction of the curriculum. We don't teach comparative governments. We don't teach in American history. I said this in one of the interviews I've done. We teach, okay, America, 250 years ago. We are a really rebellious crowd. We didn't like the king. We didn't like taxation without representation, so we banded together and we fought a revolution. And since that point in the American experiment, we have been struggling and striving to be a better nation. But we always talk about it, and look, I teach about it, in the context of democracy and expanding or contracting democracy. And we talk about those other countries, like, Russia or China or Nazi Germany, as having a different kind of government that is scary and undermining. And so when people hear the word fascism, even think about the last few weeks. I mean, like, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, but you can see how many people are so offended on a certain side that I actually say I am explaining fascistic behavior. No, I did not call you a fascist, but I am explaining the dehumanization, not only the division, but dehumanizing people, but having this view of a mythic past that never existed in the first place. And the us versus them, and undermining the them in such a way that the them is like specks.
You know as well as anybody that public education has been under assault for several decades. I wrote a lot about it when I wrote for the Washington Post for many years. And we saw the ratcheting up of the attacks, the privatization movement. Now we have, and that's just sort of morphed into total assault on teachers. And I am actually worried about the future of public education. You write that it's inextricably okay linked democracy and education. Presumably, you mean public education. Can you talk about why that is so? The founding fathers, of course, did talk about education, but they really, most of them weren't talking about it for everybody.
Correct.
That evolved. So, how do you connect it and think they're so connected?
So let me start. Even though the founding fathers were not perfect, I think that's obvious. But they did have a few good ideas. Like, they created this country. And I do think that oftentimes, I mean, we have a right to have a lot of criticism of who they were and what they did, particularly on slavery. But the notion of the creation of the country was really important, and the sense that the country was going to be created and governed by we the people. And there was that, and they were very, very concerned. Look, Madison was very concerned about factions. They were very concerned about tyranny and about kings and the separation of powers, executive, judicial, Congress, and then the separation of federal versus state were all an attempt to fight back against a concentration of power. So I want to just kind of use that lens now. They thought that it was basically white dudes who were supposed to be voting, but they understood that, and this is where the connection starts. It doesn't end there, but it starts as a seed. They understood, and they talked a lot about how education was a bulwark against tyranny, because education was the discernment of fact and fiction, that education was the way in which people started learning how to think, not what to think, and to actually arrive at their own conclusions without the concentration of power dictating a decision to them. So whether it was Washington or Jefferson or Madison or Franklin, and it's not all the framers, but they talked a lot about the importance of education. It's been us over the course of these 200 some odd years that have tried to expand that to be opportunity for all. And one of the reasons I use Johnson in the book as one of my stories. Look, half the book is both a warning, but it is actually a love letter to teachers and to the efforts of what teachers do and what public education is supposed to be. And so I use Johnson as a teacher, and using his lived experience as a teacher as one of the motivating reasons for Title I, for the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. And I also use Brown versus Board of Education and what happened both before and after, which is frankly the origins of vouchers. But I too am very worried about public education. But so the first issue is the first connection is just the whole issue about the learning how to think and how to have agency, and how to actually the discernment between not only fact and fiction, but being able to problem solve. The second is pluralism. And I'm actually more worried about the second today than I am about the first. Because if you think about vouchers, you also think about the marketization and the issue around charters, and you think about, like I just heard today, New Hampshire, one of the Republicans in New Hampshire is thinking they're going to make every single New Hampshire school a charter school as opposed to a public school. This whole attack on the institution, the convening, the community that gets created in public schools. Who are they? Take a neighborhood public school. I know I'm spending too much time on this, but this is really important. Take a neighborhood public school. The catchment area is the neighborhood. So all sorts of people go. How many other places, maybe with the exception of work, do you have people who are different in the same place? We live in a much more homogenized society these days. And so schooling is one of the few places where you actually see people who are different than you, and you have to learn how to get along with them. I'm sorry, inclusion and diversity. Words that we used to think were a strength of the country. And the pluralism that happens in schools when you bring people together and learn how to work with each other and deal with each other and respect each other, even if you're different. That is part of how we learn how to congeal as a society. And without that, how do you congeal as a society? How do you actually have a society that cares about each other and believes in each other, even when you have significant differences? What is the promise of America without that kind of pluralism?
I'm going to throw out a few ideas that are connected, and I want you to just sort of riff off of them, okay? One of the things I've always been interested in is why teachers are so disrespected. Decade in, decade out. Many of them have to work 3 jobs, literally 3 jobs, to pay their bills. Is it because they are women, mostly women? Would it be different if they were mostly men? I don't know. Is it part of the anti-intellectual strain of thought that's always been part of American culture? There was a book written in 1963 by Richard Hofstadter, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, which chronicled the rejection of expertise, the kind of thing we're seeing now. So we've seen periods of this before, but it strikes me that this period is different.
I think it's, so look, I think it's all of the above. And I can throw out a couple of other reasons too. One, it's a disproportionately female workforce. Number 2, it's one of the only things we do for every single American child. It's how many other things that we do in America that actually is a government service, a proactive, positive government service for each and every person. And frankly, you know, we still have a country that does not respect the tools and conditions you need to create capitalism for everyone. And we're still fighting for equal opportunity. I think if we, and so I think it is part of the strain of, you know, frontier versus intellectualism that is part and parcel of America. Individualism versus community, socialism, that's part and parcel of America. We've gone through those strains all the time, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. I think it's a lot of that. But at the end of the day, I think it's a disproportionately female workforce, and that until unions started becoming ascendant, there's been a friction about what gets paid for and doesn't get paid for in America.
Let's talk a little about unions. We know they have a lot of power in certain neighborhoods, and in some places they don't. I've always thought that if they were as powerful as their enemies thought, then teachers would make a lot more money.
Correct.
But I also wondered, when I started writing about the privatization movement, if part of it wasn't to destroy the teachers' unions and public unions. Do you think that was part of it?
Yes.
Fastest answer I ever got.
I mean, think about, so let me kind of take a step back, which is, there are 3 ways, in my judgment, that regular people in America have any power to affect change. One is pretty obvious. It's voting. We're supposed to be able to vote for officials who then do the will of the people, right? And hopefully we actually have statehood like we're trying to get to in Washington, D.C. Boy, that would have been an applause line. So, but one is elections, obviously. And look at what they've all tried to do in terms of undermining elections. The second is also fairly obvious, which is the ability to get an education so that you have the skills and knowledge to be able to do what you want to do in life. And in America, we have 50 different states and 5 different territories that do a public education system one way or the other. The third is, since, and I'll borrow what Ann Richards said, is that most of us are not born with a silver spoon in our mouths. So how do you have economic power if you're not born with a silver spoon in his mouth? You know, if you're a billionaire like Elon Musk, you have economic power. If you're a real estate developer like Trump, you have economic power. But what about most people? That's part of the reason that the ascendancy of the middle class happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with the ascendancy of unions. When 1 out of every 3 people in America were in a union, you had a bigger, broader middle class. And what did you talked about privatization in terms of American education, but what did the Chamber of Commerce do? Lewis Powell, as head of it, from the 1960s on.
It was a 1971 memo that Lewis Powell wrote about how to start to create a conservative infrastructure because he was worried about communists taking over.
And then think about also the 1950s. Vouchers were thought of as choice for who? Basically white parents. What happened in the union movement in the arena of organizing? Right to work. What was it for? It actually undermined the ability of unions to organize in the South. So there was a racial context and connection to a lot of the privatization and the attempts to thwart unionism as well as thwarting public schools.
Back to the book. What surprised you, if anything, the most when you were doing your research? Or what did you just sort of love the most?
So I had a ton more stories in the book, but I also wanted it to be less than 200 pages because I wanted people to read it. Well, for any of you who know me, you know this is not going to sound weird, but look, I love my members, and I just fell in love with people again. And in writing some of this, I just really wanted to be able to have people read a page and say, these people are great people. These people are trying to help America. These people are trying to help kids. See who these people are. See who Raphael Bohem is. See who Ryan Richmond is. See who Lillian Keyes is. See who Jeff Trotto is. See them for who they are and what they do. And none of you would know their names. You might know Abby Clemens' name. You might know Lyndon Johnson's name. Maybe you know Barbara Johnson's name. But you don't know most of the people who teach. If they're your kids' teachers, you know them. These are who teach in our schools all across America. They do this to make a difference in the lives of kids. That's the thing that I would say, that's what I kept on saying, I want to make sure that people hear this. And I just kind of fell back in love with the members I represent.
And the profession's in a lot of trouble because There have been so many attacks on teachers that the education schools are not quite empty, but the number of students who go into it,
Right.
It's tiny. And is that by design? Was that by design?
Well, I think that what I'm seeing as by design, I think if you read Project 2025, you see it's by design. I think that there is a fear of knowledge. There is a fear of the future. There is a fear of children and young people having agency. There is a fear of pluralism. So all the things, I keep saying this, we are the antidote to a lot of the darkness in America right now, a lot of the fear, a lot of the propaganda, a lot of the disinformation. And so if one can actually try to wreck it, then you're going to have just, just like you did before Enlightenment, different kind of serfdoms. And if you think about it, what vouchers are intended to do is they are defunding mechanism for community schools and neighborhood schools. They are by design fragmenting what we do in public education. They are by design fragmenting society, whereas public schools by design are about congealing society. So yes, I think that some of this is by design, and look, some of it is by incompetence, and some of it is just by stupidity.
Some people
But
argue.
yet, let me just say, even with all of this, still 80 to 90% of kids in America go to public schools, and still, but even with all of this, parents give high marks to their local schools.
They still do, although they're not as high, but they still do. Some people have argued that the decline of civic education has helped make people just dumber about their civic responsibility, and that No Child Left Behind, George Bush's and Race to the Top, Barack Obama's, narrowed the curriculum so much and put such an emphasis on teaching to the test prep, et cetera, that the kind of critical thinking you want kids to learn, that kind of curriculum and education and lessons really took short shrift. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yes.
Another fast one.
So I think there's a couple of things here. One, so again, let me start. Sorry, I keep on not looking at this side. My apologies. So first, let me just say, public schools are not perfect. They need to be strengthened, not abandoned. And you can find lots of, I love when I do one of these kind of conversations, and then imputed to me is the responsibility for every single public school in America and every single thing that happens in public schools in America. I have not been the superintendent of schools of any of them. And I would hope that if I had been, it would be better than we have right now. So let me just say that. But if you are a social studies teacher after literally 2000, you can't spend the time doing the work you want to do because of tests. So to teach civics well, it really requires a young person in an age-appropriate way actually understanding what government does. I used to love when people would say, well, Barack Obama is responsible for the sanitation services in New York City. No, he is not. Not even when he was president was he responsible for but it showed a lot of not knowing who was responsible and whatever, and you didn't have the time in a 5th grade or 6th grade class or even a high school social studies class to teach all of the nitty-gritty. Plus, if you did, people would be bored silly. So that's why, like what Ralph Bohnholm does, which is why I lifted him up, is he does an example in DC of getting kids involved and engaged in trying to solve a problem, and then using whatever civitas or civic services to get there. That is the way you should be teaching civics, so that people understand who does what and how do you influence it. And it requires more than 20 minutes. It just requires to understand that, to have agency, to understand this, and we don't have the time.
Did they ever teach it the way we think they taught it? You were talking before about a mythological past.
No.
I wonder, so they didn't.
I
I just want to say this. One of the things that has struck me over the years is people talk about quality of education and then and voting patterns, et cetera. And it strikes me that the people in America who have been the most disenfranchised and who have been the most discriminated against are Black Americans. And yet, election after election, they still vote in their own interests more than anybody else.
So I would say that one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how many decades away we are from World War II. Because there was, look, I'm in my 60s, and I remember as a kid listening to my grandparents, who were immigrants, talking about the America that they loved, and listening to my parents critiquing America, but always having a sense of its essential goodness. Now, I don't want to be Pollyannish here. The farther away we are from the fight for fundamental freedom, that's why, like, what Pompeo said was so bizarre, because he knew better. But the farther we are from that, if you're a kid right now, what do you care about? I mean, you care about your own freedom, but America fighting for freedom against Nazism or totalitarianism, or like, there's no connection. And I think that ethos, so even though I'm not sure that we ever taught it right, although, look, we had, like, I taught a program called We the People, which I loved. We had many more civics programs. Linda McMahon, sorry to say this, I mean, how do you do the honoring of the 250th anniversary and you don't even have some of the bipartisan civic programs on your group of people? How do you just have propagandists on there? So all I'm saying is, I'm not sure that we ever have taught it perfectly well, but we made it for people, like, when they had, we made it for some kids far more interesting and more connected. And I think we don't do that because of No Child Left Behind and because of Race to the Top. I think that what happened from 2000 on was education was viewed as very much about your individual pursuit, as opposed to what role do you have in the society of us in the American experiment.
And then your book talks about some of the laws some Republican states have passed that actually don't allow teachers to teach the truth.
Right.
And all right, we're going to go to questions. So if you want to ask a question, line up here. I'm going to start with the one on paper that I have. And I will ask no long wind-ups. We just like questions. And I will rudely interrupt you if you do it. So just so you know. All right, could you comment on the relationship between ed tech and fascism? This assumes there is one, so you're going to talk.
Look, I think that there are, so are we talking ed tech? Are we talking AI? Are we talking particular entities of AI like Peter Thiel or Sam Altman or Elon Musk? I think that there is, just like, think about AI like we thought about the oil industry or the railroad industry at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. That there are always these, and I used to love teaching this particular class, captains of industry or robber barons. And you can imagine what I got into in teaching that. But I did actually make sure in my class, I asked the question whether they were captains of industry or robber barons. But there's always in the in this country a new industry that emerges. Not always, but a new industry that emerges, and the entities that are on top of it make a whole lot of money and actually undermine a whole lot of people. And that is happening in terms of AI right now, as it was happening with the oil industry and as it was happening with the railroad industry. I think the fear that I have is that, and I say this as someone who just did a national institute with some of the biggest players in AI. My fear is twofold. Number one, I watched what happened with social media, and it is a complete and utter disaster in terms of attention of children and in terms of what has happened in terms of society and the fear that and the just the red hot disputes that we have in society right now and the anger. And there was no regulation. The immunization that social media companies got, calling themselves basically the press, they basically get away with anything they want to do. And we were unsuccessful in getting, and we tried, we're unsuccessful in getting baseline safety and security regulation for the AI industry. In fact, the only thing we won was that we defeated in the bill that Trump tried to get a 10-year preemption.
So before the first question, let me just ask this. I will say that this woman is the most maligned person in the education world probably ever. People accuse her of things she never said. They accuse her of things she never did. She's constantly accused of keeping schools closed, which is actually quite the opposite. Your union put out a big program about how to open them safely. How does that feel? I mean, you really, really get it.
So I would say 20 years ago, it felt really terrible. And I remember being in a car one day and talking to a friend of mine after a particularly really stupid, venal New York Post editorial when I was the president of the UFT, and really feeling sorry for myself. And the person who was a dear friend of mine on the phone said, "You don't have time to feel sorry for yourself." And what it did, and it was a good friend, it was not like, and said, they're doing it because you're making a point. And so what I've gotten to, it's not as if I am immune from it. You know, the one that really bothered me was that how many conversations did I have with people who were really fearful about what COVID was doing and convincing them to open schools if we had the right protocols, and how many times and how many conversations, and the fact that we were trying to open schools safely and effectively because we knew that society was breaking because of COVID, and to instead of getting the help from these, you know, from the Washington Post or from the Wall Street Journal, I was getting killed. And that bothered me. But this is what I would say to all of you to answer Valerie's question. I think about my life as how lucky am I? I don't think about it that way. I think about it as every single day I get to be the head of a union that every single day fights for educational opportunity for kids and for economic opportunity for adults. And I am the luckiest person on earth that I get to do this.
Okay, our first question.
Hi, I'm Yesenia, visiting from California, and just wanted to share proudly went through public school from most of my K through 12 up until my master's program at UCLA, and I feel like so proud of. I just wanted to say I feel like teachers play a significant part in our lives, not only as students, but almost in so many ways are second parents, right? And right now, I feel like the amount of hostility that our children across the state of California and across the country are experiencing as a result of the color of their skin or as a result of their immigration status. Every day in the streets of LA, just yesterday there was a raid that almost picked up my own mom. There are children whose graduations are being interrupted, unfortunately, as a result of ICE. And so just constant fascist activities that we are trying to push back against.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I'm leading up to it because it's so complex,
I
unfortunately.
understand, but we have other questions.
Yeah. Our teachers, unfortunately, are now being forced to protect their students from being detained and their parents who are being detained even at school drop-off zones.
So look, I would say in Washington, D.C., Free D.C. is here. I want to just call them out they've been amazing. Parents and teachers in Chicago, in New York, in Washington, and in L.A., and frankly, other places. Portland, thank you. But people have created safe passageways to ensure parents and teachers together, to ensure that our kids could get to school. That is the best of American society. But the other thing that I'm really proud of teachers, and we did this like a couple of weeks, look, January 20th, I wrote to Donald Trump. I know the dude from New York. I said, please do not get rid of, I said, I'll beg you, don't get rid of the ruling that made schools and hospitals and churches the sensitive location ruling. Yeah. And he never even bothered answering. But what teachers are doing around the country, they are in locus parentis. What they're doing around the country is we basically say, you can't come into a school. Like, could you imagine a guy with a mask coming in and we giving kids up to a guy with a mask? In any way. People would say, what? So no, we demand to see a warrant. And you're seeing the escalation, and it's very dangerous. I would say the last 3 weeks have been very dangerous. We're seeing it in Portland and in Chicago in particular right now. But the American people are standing up to it. And I bet on the American people, including the teachers who are saying, we're protecting our kids.
You're very optimistic.
I am.
Thank you.
Hopeful.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to try to get to everybody.
Hi, 2 quick questions. I'll take a wild guess that part of the Republican advocacy for charter schools and vouchers for private schools is because teachers in such institutions are far less likely to be unionized than in public schools. And since teachers are overwhelmingly Democrat, they see that as, a good thing, obviously. So my question is, how can you push back against those trends? Because it seems that more children are being channeled to charter schools. And my other question has to do with any lessons learned from COVID. And it seemed to infuriate a lot of parents when teachers' unions were advocating to keep the schools closed. And with the benefit of a couple years hindsight now, would you and the teachers' unions have done anything different in that?
So
let me just say real quickly, and then I'm going to ask a couple people to just run through questions, and then you can address them all at the same time.
Sure. You want me to?
No, go ahead.
So this is where the disinformation and misinformation are. I know that there were people in our Fairfax local who were advocating for schools to be closed. On a national basis, we advocated for schools to be open safely. And in most of the big cities, we negotiated them to be open safely. This is part of where disinformation and misinformation happen all the time because we didn't get a fair shake in terms of what to do. Now, somebody could say, like Mr. Perez over here, what you were saying about opening was not sufficient. You know, you were not giving but what we learned in, I would say by January 2021, what we learned was that if you had good ventilation and enough money for COVID testing, you could open everywhere. And that's what, Raj Shah and I, from the Rockefeller Foundation and I, wrote an op-ed about that in January 2021. And so lessons learned, schools better be a priority next time. But this is where trust and truth, it's clear that if you have, and this is what happens in authoritarian regimes, if you don't have enough trust, you don't have a lot of truth. And look at what's happening in terms of vaccines right now. So could I have been louder? Could I have been more emphatic? Probably, but you need to have a federal policy, and even a loudmouth like me is not going to be able to overcome a lot of pandemic as much as I would have liked to.
Thank you. Do we really know that most teachers are Democratic? Is that something anybody knows?
Well, we know that most of my union members are, but it's not that. It's like 60, 20, 20. It's changing like everywhere else.
Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering if you had any advice for young people in the next generation of education advocates as we continue to navigate attacks to public education and education policy.
Do you have several hours? Okay, number one, first, thank you for being here. Really, yes. Number two, you're not going to be able to take on every single issue in education advocacy. The promise of public education is very much, I think, aligned with the promise of America, because what public education does is it says, it's the social contract that says that we're going to help each and every child try to get to their God-given potential. And we have to learn different ways of doing it. We didn't get to this point, but I do think it's not about accountability. I think it's about engagement. And I think it's about how do we create every public school to be one that is safe and welcoming, so a parent can make sure, feels like, okay, my kid's okay. Teacher feels like a kid is okay. A kid feels like a kid is okay. Safe and welcoming are both very important. But the second piece is we have to make sure that curriculum is engaging and relevant. We have to create that kind of agency. It's not about the test scores these days. If you think about social media and everything else, it is about how do we engage, how do we create agency. So I can say that in a broad way, but there are hundreds of different ways we do that in schools all over. So pick something that you really love within the context of public education. Fight for public education of public good. Fight for the funding that we need.
And
but
how
then
do you do
pick
that?
Something
How do you
that
fight
you want
for
to
it?
do. Show two things.
You only have 30 seconds.
Community. See, I answered some questions really quickly.
I know that.
Community is really important. We are a communal effort, not an individual effort. So pick a school that you want to help. Go to, say it's a school that Parents Together is part of, or Free DC is part of, or there's a PTA. Volunteer.
Register voters.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much.
Let's do this. ask your question real quick, and then let's have everybody ask their questions so she can answer them.
Got it. Thank you. So I'm just,
And register voters.
you've been talking a lot about community and the power of public schools to bring diverse people together. And I'm a teacher, and one thing that I've noticed is there is a diminishing trend right now in parent and community engagement in schools all around the board. And that really hurts students, it hurts parents, it hurts trust with teachers. Teachers aren't viewed as experts.
I'm sorry, we need a question.
Sorry.
We have
Well,
3
no,
minutes.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just wondering ways that you think that schools, administrations, teachers, people like parents in the community could help bolster these communities, because it doesn't feel like our government is going to be doing it.
Well,
Thank you. Wait, no, let's have the next person ask your question.
Hi, Randy.
and you'll
you.
remind me the question.
It's Connie McKenna. I'm not a redhead anymore, but I worked at AFT for 20 years, and we honor Randy. She's such a freaking fighter. There's nobody like her in the union world.
Right.
So
Need your question.
beyond flattery,
I was
my
going to
last
say, flattery will get you everywhere.
but I'm retired, so there's nothing in it for
They
me.
really do stop this right at 8, so I need your question.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have it. My last assignment was charter schools. It was very clear to us that charter schools were really just a strategy to get the very generous education budgets in towns out of the hands of the unions. And we were too busy to fight it, so we waited for charter.
What's the question? She needs a question. I'm sorry. We're about to
Okay,
end.
well, you're taking time too, I must say, but I'll get to my question.
No, ma'am,
I'm sorry.
He's about to end this.
What's up with charter schools? And what's up? One of the strategies everyone should know in charter schools is that they do not spend money on arts. And
Okay.
Let me get to
Thank
that
you.
one. So I'll get to community and I'll get to charter schools.
Okay. Let's have the other questions real quick.
How do you deal with the concept that schools were founded, originally public schools, to produce a reliable, obedient workforce, and that we're focused on teaching to the test and a very particular curriculum? In contrast to the idea of building community, building engagement, building critical thinking. all that.
Thank you. Do we have one more question over there? Oh, yeah, of course. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. You're done.
All right. So schools, think about even the 3 questions and what it means about what schools are to the world. Schools should be about more community. How do we have the strategies as the teacher from, are you from DC? Yes. Okay. So how do we create a way that really encourages parents and teachers to work together in school, knowing full well that many times parents are working 3 or 4 jobs. And these days, particularly with all of our immigrant parents, people are really scared. So how do we create an environment that people feel welcomed, that nobody feels blamed, and that we do that? And that is work that's part of the reason why we push very hard the strategy of community schools, of which our union basically is involved in about 1,000 of them around the country, but we should have many, many more. And that's part of a strategy that we're trying to do. And if you're a member of my union, we are now putting $2.5 million of grants out to our affiliates to try to do this kind of engagement. So we're doing it as doing it through locals, we're trying to do that. So if you're a member of my union, come see me afterwards. In terms of charters, we've had a very mixed environment with. It's different than vouchers, but there are, and I say this in the book, there are a whole bunch of people like the Eva Moskowitz of the world who wanted to use charters as an alternative public schooling system. And ultimately, what they found out over the course of years, first, by the way, Eva Moskowitz's charter system, Success Academy, was closed longer than many public schools and never was criticized for it. So what does that tell you about where the criticism was coming from? But secondly, charters don't do very much better than regular public schools. And because it's really hard to do a school. And frankly, what we should be learning about from each other is what the best practices are if we actually really care about kids. And ultimately, what we're seeing a lot is a lot of charters are closing these days. Number 3, schooling has changed over the years. Schooling at the start of the 19th century was very much about how you create a workforce. Schooling then frankly, in the 50s, in the 60s to the 70s, there were a lot of open classrooms. A lot of schooling started being kind of aligned with what the environment was. And frankly, what I'm saying is what we need to do is we need to have some really basic values of what kids need to know and be able to do in the 21st century. We need to be able to actually, as a social studies teacher, teach kids how to think, not what to think. If I have kids, I don't start my classroom asking children, who did your parents vote for in the last election? I start my classroom really trying to figure out how I create a welcoming and safe environment where we teach and treat every single child as the special being that child is. That is the beauty of public schooling. And that is what I am going to fight for with every breath I have, each and every day that I can.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.